Hi, Amy.
Hi, Anne.
It's nice to talk to you.
It's very nice to talk to you. Virtual meeting.
Yeah, so after all these years, they're finally having two women together on Blogging Heads. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it took long enough, but it's exciting to have an all-female edition.
Yeah, I don't know. This is going to be very, very unusual. I don't know.
Well, we'll try to do a good one the first time out.
Go ahead.
Oh,
we'll be all go ahead after you. We'll be too nice, and then,
it'll be
Bob wants us
excessively
to fight,
formal. Well, maybe if we do an excellent job, they won't spend another year before they'll have an all-female edition.
Yeah, we have to show them that the two women approach can be just as scrappy as Bob and Mickey. What do you think?
I think we can manage that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, since we've got and it's not because it's two women, but we want to start with the abortion question, right?
Right.
And the Supreme Court heard oral argument in the so-called partial birth abortion case yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I was just reading Linda Greenhouse's account of it in the New York Times. Mm-hmm. And I know you have a lot of background in this area, so I want you to go first and talk about it.
Sure. Well, I feel like, unfortunately, I have a lot of background in this. When I worked on the Hill, I worked for Tom Daschle from 95 to 97, which was really when partial birth first came up as a political issue.
Do you accept calling it partial birth, or do you want to call it something else?
You know, I usually say so-called partial birth abortion. It's a little wordy. It is annoying. I mean, that's part of the political and legal problem and medical problem, honestly, is that there's no such procedure, as you know, called partial birth abortion. It's just a phrase that is used to kind of prompt a visceral reaction from people.
Well, that's why I was surprised that you used it when you're so politically sensitive about it. I felt like I had to say partial birth abortion, and you went right ahead and said, I felt I had to say so-called, and you just went right ahead and used the term that the proponents of the statute use. But
well, I guess I've given in just because, we used to call it late-term abortion for a long time, particularly when it first came up. But it's been 10 years. It's kind of in the political lexicon, for better or for worse. And I guess, you may completely disagree with this, and I go back and forth depending on what day it is. But I feel like it's almost ceased to mean what it used to mean, and it's just a reference to a political debate now.
But isn't calling it a late-term abortion inaccurate? I mean, isn't the whole point of the case that there are two ways of doing a late-term abortion, and that the case is really about whether one of the two ways is going to be prevented? Yeah,
well, again, not to get into too many detail, but when I was working for Daschle, he was a senator from the most right-to-life state in the country.
Right.
He was Catholic who felt very personally torn, not just one of these, I'm personally opposed, but I can't do anything about it. He was just torn up about this. And so we spent 2 years trying to come up with an alternative that would find some way to place some restrictions on late-term abortions, regardless of the medical procedures. So we were trying to take off the table what I think is really the most disturbing part of this law and of this case, which is setting the precedent of allowing congressional representatives and judges to make medical decisions and decide what is or is not the best medical procedure to use.
Right.
So the way we had gone about it is to say, okay, let's place limits on late-term abortion after viability, but before viability, use whatever medical procedure is safest. We leave that up to the doctor, unlike Republicans. We don't distrust doctors. We don't distrust women. We think they are the ones who should be making the decision, because in some of these cases, you've got some very difficult medical circumstances, and I certainly wouldn't want to be the one to step in and say, well, we'd really rather you used another procedure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it also, I think, gets at the fact that there's something extremely disingenuous about the pro-life supporters who have really gotten behind the so-called partial birth abortion, we'll say that from now on, ban, which is that if you take them at their word, which I'm not sure you should, but they say that you can always use another procedure, which means passing a partial birth abortion ban.
But the other procedure is dangerous, right? It's the other procedure.
It's not actually that dangerous,
but fragments and so forth.
Well, there are certainly some circumstances in which you would prefer to use a DNX instead of a D&C. There's no question about that. But what I'm saying is, they say you don't need a health exception because there's always another procedure you could use, which if you take them at their word means there would be a net change of 0 in the number of abortions that were performed under this ban. So it's not a way of reducing the abortion rate at all.
Right.
It's a way of
I know.
making a
I think
political point.
People don't really understand that very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to get people on my blog to focus on, I have a lot of conservative readers, and a lot of them are anti-abortion, which I'm not. But they were really shocked that I was taking the side that I thought the statute was unconstitutional. I mean, I got some really strong comments. Like one of my regular readers said something like, "We have always disagreed on abortion, but this, wow, just wow! This post is depressingly cold and scary." I mean, which I think shows how emotional people are. That the partial birth abortion imagery has. Well, I mean, I'm not to make light of it. I mean, it's serious, but that the picture that people have in their heads is so powerfully emotionally moving that the idea of focusing on the actual issue in the case seems to be something that people think is just sort of cold and horrible and monstrous. Just to even say you should focus on the issue in the case. It's not about whether the fetus is going to die or not. It's about whether a woman is going to be told she has to have one procedure rather than another.
Right.
When the one that she's being denied, it could be one that could puncture her uterus and cause her not to be able to have another child.
Yeah, and that was the points one of the justices made yesterday. I can't remember at the moment which one
They talked
it was.
about that a lot. I mean, the whole argument was about that specific medical point, which is what the case is about.
Right, but the point that we're not talking about saving a life or ending a life. We're talking about ending a life by a different means.
Right.
And the question is what procedure you use.
Right.
And that, I think you're right, has gotten completely lost, mostly because the proponents of this ban want that point to be murky.
Well, they got so much leverage out of the idea of partial birth abortion that to concede that actually it's a complex question and that the other procedure is also something that would be horrible if you focused on that too.
Right.
Why should they let that go when they get so much political leverage out of this one idea they've been able to be so successful at planting in people's heads to the point of causing them not to be able to think of any of the surrounding problems?
Yeah. Well, if you hold up a baby like Rick Santorum did on one very memorable day that we spent in the Senate chambers and stick scissors in the back of its neck and say that's what doctors are doing, sorry, a baby doll. He did not actually hold up a real baby. Even Rick Santorum would be above doing that, I think. But, that's the kind of visual imagery, and all of those pictures were always of 9-month-old babies.
But they never pictured the other practice, and the statute was just about forcing the doctor to do the other thing.
Right.
Which if you held up a doll and did that to that doll, that would be shocking to people as well.
That would be
extremely shocking. And the main
shocking.
reason why they don't do that is that with respect to the partial birth version of the two procedures, they can say it's close to infanticide. And I read a piece on National Review, and lots of people in my blog comments were saying the same thing. Basically, they didn't want to talk about the difference between those two procedures that are at issue. They wanted to talk about the difference between partial birth abortion and infanticide, that if you had the baby completely outside of the mother's body, well, then why not kill it then? Why, if you could do one, why couldn't you do the other? Which seems to me to be just, obviously there's a distinction between the two things, but it's sort of that slippery slope argument is somehow, they go right to that argument and they won't focus on the actual issue in the case. And then I also feel, well, a lot of times in law you feel like by presenting something in a legal form, you're kind of sacrificing your inhumanity so that, where is your human warmth if you want to say, look, there's actually a specific legal issue here, we need to concentrate on that. And so I think you're sort of cornered into seeming like, well, if you want to talk about it in the legal way, that shows your inhumanity. Let's talk about let's talk about infanticide, which this is so close to. And then that dominates a certain type of political argument.
Yeah, it does. I mean, to use an overused political word, it frames the debate in a way that doesn't.
I'm glad you think that's overused. I'm tired of that myself.
Lord.
Although that was the Democrats' big idea, was to talk about framing, and they seem to have been successful lately. So maybe we should be talking about framing.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll get into that during the campaign section of this discussion. I don't know if that was what did it for them.
Not time for a segue yet, so I didn't mean to create segue alarm
material. That's okay.
But go ahead. So you wanted to say, so what do you think the court is going to do?
Honestly, I'm having a hard time telling what the court is going to do, just because we don't know what the two new justices are inclined to think on this topic.
Well, Alito didn't talk at all at oral argument.
Right.
He didn't say one word. But Chief Justice Roberts talked a lot. Both Roberts and Kennedy talked a lot about just the specifics of the difference between the two procedures and whether there were times when the one procedure was more dangerous. And a lot hinged on the idea that Congress made findings, like the difference between this case and the case that was based on a Nebraska statute back in, I think it was 2000, which the court struck down. And now we have a federal statute. And the big argument that there's a difference between the two statutes is that Congress made findings. So you were there. What do you think of the whole Congress made findings argument?
Well, I can tell you just one short story. When we were putting together our bill, the big question, of course, was how you craft the health exception. And we felt we needed to make it narrower than just health.
Right,
but
because
also,
everything is given up once you say health. Everything's health, right?
Yes. And we needed to be able to get some pro-life members on board with us. But we also got some pressure from pro-choice members to include specifically mental health. And I can tell you the way we tried to find examples of when you would need to perform an abortion late in pregnancy because of mental health circumstances is basically I just got a lot of obstetrics manuals out of the Library of Congress and tried to come up with a hypothetical. Because we talked to dozens of doctors, and everybody said to us, I've never heard of a circumstance when you would actually perform an abortion. Now, you might perform an early delivery, but that's very different. That certainly you can come up with a scenario in which a woman's on lithium and she has to go off of that while she's pregnant, and she starts to have a mental break, and you'd need to get her back on. But you know, in terms of coming up with hypotheticals of when you would need to perform an abortion, I was a little disturbed that I was a 22-year-old looking through obstetrics manuals with no medical training. And that's
it's sort of horrifying to think that that's the way that Congress gets the jump on doctors making decisions. Is that, you know, various people who are working with members of Congress just go and get some medical manuals and start to figure it out on their own, and then the finding of Congress trumps what doctors are saying because, well, they looked at some medical manuals.
Right.
That's pretty shocking to me.
Right. And I think you got at some of that from some of the questioning yesterday from the justices, trying to determine whether they should put any stock in these congressional findings, whether it's anything more than just legislators loading up a bill with information that they think is going to be slanted towards them.
Now, obviously, the members of Congress are trying to find a solution, and you're describing it because they're trying to find something that works for them in a sort of a political structure.
Right.
And then they're trying to replace doctors' opinions. They're much less qualified. It seems to me that the argument for structuring the laws so that the decisions are made by the appropriate experts and also by the women whose, you know, bodies are the location of the whole dispute seems so much stronger and really just deeply disturbing to think of members of Congress thinking that they can, by claiming to make findings, trump the roles of the people who are most involved and the people who are most qualified to make the decisions. Not only the medical decisions, but also the personal and moral decisions.
Yeah, and it really is. I mean, I don't think this has come up enough, but I've been waiting for someone to really push Republicans on why don't you trust doctors? You know, what is it about doctors, which used to be a pretty esteemed, profession in our society? Why is it that they assume that a doctor, given the choice, will always want to perform an abortion and will always want to use a procedure that they find abhorrent?
And for late-term abortion, I mean, who are the doctors? It's not really. Is it the same people, or are these different doctors? I mean, are these abortion specialists, or are these people who are obstetricians dealing with elaborate pregnancy problems that their regular patients have?
Yeah, there are a few specialists, and we know who they are. They're scattered in a few states. But mostly, what's so disturbing about this is a procedure that's used in emergency situations in hospitals by doctors who did not intend to perform an abortion, but who find themselves with a woman in dire medical straits, and they have to decide what to do.
Did you look at all at the question of why don't they just do cesareans in those cases? Why are they killing the fetus?
Yeah, yeah. And, again, we're talking about a very small number of cases. Cases where a woman has blood pressure problems that were pregnancy-induced, and, where a cesarean might have risk of really severe blood loss. We're not trying to pretend that this happens all of the time.
Or
but
were
the
there
question
cases
really is,
where something is wrong with the child has birth defects, and they want to kill the child because of its disabilities? Because that's what troubles a lot of people, the idea that you're finding out late in a pregnancy that there's something wrong with the child, and so you reject it because of its disabilities. And so it really, to me, that really is more like infanticide, because you're rejecting a child because something is wrong with it.
Yeah, that appears to happen far less often late in pregnancy than simply finding out that there is a fatal abnormality and the child is either dead already in the womb or will die very soon after delivery. In that case, it's more of an emotional cost for the woman to know that you're bearing a child that will not live. And, the interesting challenge there is that's the case in which most women, when they say, what is the circumstance under which I personally think I would have an abortion, they say cases of severe fetal abnormalities. The problem politically is you can't put that out there because, as you pointed out...
That actually is the thing that connects more with infanticide. The idea is if the child is in bad enough condition, it's acceptable to kill it. And if you're doing that inside the woman's body because you have that opinion, there's something morally wrong with that opinion.
Yes, as you say, it's a very morally difficult case. And I think most people have pretty strong opinions about whether or not that is right. For the rest of them, I mean, truly, when we talk to doctors, what we kept hearing time after time is, if there is another reason to terminate late in the pregnancy, and we're talking after viability, we just do pregnancy termination by early delivery. And that is not the same thing as abortion. There are very few doctors out there who actually perform abortions late after viability.
Well, I mean, maybe the reason for not wanting to leave the decision to the doctor is the idea that the few doctors who are willing to do it are doctors that you don't want to trust.
Yeah, I guess so. But then the question is, what do you do about every other doctor, and what do you do about those women?
Right.
In
And I hate
really
the idea that
circumstances?
a doctor could be in a situation to be trying to deal with a situation, and there's two procedures, and then he's like afraid of being prosecuted.
Yeah.
If he slips over into something that will be considered the other procedure, and he might have to quickly make a decision, and to have that as part of what he's taking or she is taking into account is just a inappropriate situation for a doctor to be put in.
Yeah.
Well, can we, talking about Justice Kennedy and how he might vote, he voted with the minority in the Nebraska case, so he was on the side of he was against abortion rights in the Nebraska case, even though he's voted for abortion rights in some other kinds of cases. In the other partial birth abortion case, he voted with the anti-rights side, or anti-abortion rights side. And now that O'Connor is gone and replaced by Alito, who we think probably would vote with those who are in favor of the statute, Kennedy's vote is going to be really important. And there's been a lot of focus on Kennedy since O'Connor retired as being the swing voter, and some people get very frustrated by what he does.
Right.
And I'm just thinking that, I'm not sure what he's going to do. I tend to think he'll find a way to vote against the statute. And I'm thinking about, just to segue us into discussing the election, we're not going to talk about abortion the whole time so that we don't lose our viewers, but I was thinking, with the change in the Senate, that it may be easier for Kennedy to, in fact, go ahead and vote in his more centrist swing voter kind of position. Because if a slot opens up on the court, the Senate will be dominated by, or the Senate will have a majority of Democrats, and the Democrats will control the Judiciary Committee, and Bush will really be kind of forced to put up a moderate, and it will be someone else like Kennedy. And so the sort of Kennedy middle position is kind of on the upswing. It sort of will be more supported in the future because the president will have to work with the Senate.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. I wonder if he was able to vote against Steinhardt. That was the Nebraska case, right?
What did you call it?
Steinhardt?
Stenberg.
Stenberg.
Stenberg
Oh,
v.
I'm
Carhart.
just as bad as, one of the justices yesterday kept messing up the name. All right, sorry about that. The Nebraska case, I'll call it,
Really?
instead of remembering. Yeah, they called it 5 or 6 different things. Carhart, Stein, something.
Stenberg and Carhart, sometimes they'll call it by one name, sometimes they'll call it by the other name.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
Well, my thought is just if you voted against on that one, it's kind of hard to justify then voting against this one that's just come up. Because
this one should be stronger, if anything. For
yeah,
one thing,
they
I think
did
there's
go
more
in and make it
tendency
more
to
specific.
defer to Congress than to state legislatures. And for another thing, Congress purported to gather all this information, although I'm not confident that they did anything very impressive.
I'm not sure the findings are so significant, but they did. The big problem the first time around was the vagueness of the wording, and they did
That's true.
strengthen that a tiny bit. So anyway, it'll be very interesting to watch what Kennedy does, but it would be surprising, I think, to go against the first case and then vote for the second one.
Yeah. But I'm thinking that Kennedy really has gotten more, the center of the court, which is Kennedy, has gotten more power because the Democrats have taken control of Congress, and the idea that we need to replace, when a new slot opens up on the court, what's going to happen. And I'm thinking, well, now the Democrats control Congress. That is going to have an effect if we get a new slot on the court.
Yeah, I just don't know how that controls his thinking now. But
No, and he shouldn't think about that. Obviously, that shouldn't have anything to do with the way he thinks about it. I'm just picturing the outcry after the case comes out.
Right.
The statute is stricken down, and Kennedy is voting with Souter and Ginsburg and Breyer and Stevens. That's what I'm picturing happening. And I'm picturing the outcry against Justice Kennedy with a lot of talk about how we need to replace one of the liberals with a conservative on the court.
Right, but that
like
couldn't
maybe
happen now.
there were rumors before the election that Stevens was sick. I don't know if that was like just some alarmist rumor that was put out there to try to remind people that the conservatives need to keep the Senate because of the Supreme Court. But in any case, they've lost the Senate, and if there's another Supreme Court fight, it's going to be
Right.
very different. And Bush
It's
won't
not
be
gonna
able to
be
put
another
people
Alito.
like Alito next
yeah,
time.
yeah. Agreed.
But let's talk about the election. I'm trying to move us into talking about the election. What did you think of, so much has happened. The Democrats winning both houses of Congress, apparently. I guess the Webb, the George Allen, Jim Webb fight seems to have pretty well resolved itself. I'm still seeing the Times on the fence about that a little bit. There's like one more canvassing that needs to be done. We still haven't heard a concession from Allen, right? But it looks like the Democrats have won both houses of Congress, and then Bush got into the act very quickly yesterday with a big press conference and the replacement of Donald Rumsfeld. So what are your impressions on how things are going now?
Well, I guess let's start with that press conference yesterday.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us tuned in very curious to see how the president would deal with the results from Tuesday. And I have to say, this White House and its political maneuvering surprised even me. That I think I expected some sort of change over at the Defense Department at some point. But I really don't think that the Rumsfeld firing, because we should take that for what it was, happened for any other reason than to change the storyline. They didn't want several days of headlines about this Democratic victory and sweep and change of power, and they found the one story that was going to swamp that. There wasn't anything else they could have put up there
good observation.
that would have changed things.
So do you think they had this completely planned out, that this was a game plan to go forward with this if they lost badly? Or maybe they should have done it a little earlier and shaken things up and gotten attention right before the election.
Yeah, I mean,
If they had this ready to go, maybe they should have done it before.
I think certainly the question of replacing Rumsfeld was on the table. It certainly seems to have been on the table last week when the president said, oh no, he's going to be staying around until 2009.
He just wouldn't concede that ground. He had to leave it there that, no, you can't make me fire Rumsfeld, you can't make me fire Rumsfeld, and yet he was completely ready to do it. He just didn't want to say that before the election.
He was ready to do it, but I don't think for a minute that their plan was to come out on Wednesday and announce this. Until they were looking at those results on Tuesday night and finally coming to grips with the fact that this was happening. And they decided they needed to change the conversation. And they did it the one way they knew how.
So do you think, I didn't get a lot of, I was flying yesterday and teaching a class, and I didn't get a lot of chance to just watch TV and see how, or even watch the internet, which is my normal pastime. I didn't get a lot of chance to see how things looked. I sort of normally feel like I can see how things look, and I don't feel that up on that right now. And yet that was really important. Like, how did yesterday look politically for people who were watching it? Not me, but how people were actually watching it. Did it look like Bush kind of got control of the public stage as he was trying to do, or did the Democrats, come forward and look like the new leaders as they meant to do, or who looked good yesterday?
Well, it was kind of both. I mean, Nancy Pelosi came out and gave a press conference in the morning and was saying exactly things like, if the president wants to adjust to this new reality, what he will do is change the civilian leadership on Iraq. Over the Pentagon, which, obviously he came out and did. So, making these bold statements of here's what the president should do turned out to be overwhelmed somewhat by what the president actually came out a few hours
I didn't even
later
see that.
did.
So she said this is what he's going to do before he did it?
No, she said this is an example of something he should do.
And then he went and did it. So was she happy when he did it?
I guess so. I mean, it gives
It's kind of
them
annoying
a little...
to tell him to do something. He actually does it. Now that takes the wind out of your sails.
It is kind of annoying, yeah. And that's what I was thinking, is that my impression was it did take the wind out of their sails. Democrats...
Wait, your impression was it did take... So the wind was taken out of their sails, eh?
Well, it is hard to stand up and say... This
was their big chance at getting wind in their sails at that point.
There's a big challenge for Bush. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to stand up and say, here are the things that we really want him to do, and then he comes out and does one of them, and then people look at you and say, next. It's obviously a very good development. But I don't know. I get the sense that just the shift in attitude among Democrats and Republicans in Washington is really important, and it's almost hard to articulate. But we've had a good 6 years and maybe more of Republicans flying high and Democrats just having this almost self-hating tentativeness and belief that they can't win, and now they're almost giddy. They
can't be too giddy. I mean, they have to look responsible all of a sudden. They can't just sit back and grouse about things and act depressed like, oh no, everything's going to hell.
Right.
Now they're responsible and they have to act like they can be trusted. I just haven't seen them like that in so long that I don't even really know how to feel now, because I just don't know how they're going to act. I just hope they better act pretty well. But in everything they do is going to be used, they're going to actually have to take responsibility for some things. I can't even picture what that's going to look like.
It is, but this is kind of it's a version of what we will see in the 2008 primaries,
right.
Which is attention to both sides, and we just haven't had that in such a long time. It's been all Republicans all the time, and so Democrats either...
And that doesn't make the Republicans look good. Neither side looked good the way it's been. I'm thinking maybe everyone will look better, and it'll be
but I think it did
encouraging.
It helped Republicans to have the assumption by everyone be that they were in charge, they were the powerful party, they were the ones who had ideas, who were active members, and Democrats, no matter what they did, were just portrayed as passive. I mean,
but at the same time, I was reading Captain's Quarters this morning, which is a blog, a conservative blog, and Captain Ed was writing that, now this is actually a chance for the Republicans, now that they're not responsible for things day to day, to kind of redefine what they stand for and to become a little more ideological and crisp about their principles, and that would actually, that can be viewed as a positive, as an opportunity. I mean, of course, everyone's always looking for the bright side in whatever, well, not everyone, but the good approach is to look for the bright side in whatever predicament you're left in. And now the predicaments have changed, and both sides have an incentive to use that to their advantage, especially with respect to the coming presidential election.
Well, if I were a conservative, I'd be saying the exact same thing. I mean, obviously, this was a repudiation of conservative philosophy.
Is it? Were they really being that conservative when they had power?
Conservatism over the past few years has meant doing whatever it takes to stay in power.
Yeah, but I think the point is that that actually isn't what's conservative, and now that they're out of power, they can get their act together and actually become conservative instead of having to be bothered with the responsibility for the day-to-day workings of things.
Okay, well then maybe instead of conservative philosophy, I should say the Republican political strategy has been repudiated. It did not work. But frankly, they're a little rusty when it comes to figuring out and organizing mission and vision.
So, I mean, can't this be used as a good opportunity for them to sort of sharpen what they're going to do with an aim at at 08?
But what I'm saying
is puts them in a better position than if they had actually kept control. They would have things would have ground on from day to day with people blaming them, and they would have looked bad in 08. This kind of gives them a chance to sharpen up their message and to, criticize the Democrats. I mean, didn't the Democrats largely win because they said the Republicans were incompetent, and they didn't have to, but that they would do things better. They'd be better. But now they have to actually do things. But at the same time, they won't be able to do all that much because they have to face the veto. So they're kind of in a predicament, aren't they? Aren't they worse off for having won? That's the question.
Really? Oh, good Lord. No, I don't agree with that at all. I think that it might have been much more difficult if they had the House but not the Senate, because they could definitely get a lot of stuff going on in the House, maybe get some attention for it, which is going to finally give them a chance to be portrayed as active and having a plan. They've always had agenda items, and they've always known what they stood for, but it was very easy for the press to dismiss it as, well, if you stand for something, put up some bills. Well, in the House, they literally couldn't even introduce things. Right. So now they finally get a chance to do that. But in the Senate, between both of those, they're going to be able to pass some stuff. And if they're very smart, what they will do is find wedge issues that they can get through and kind of, put Bush to the mat, make him veto some of this stuff.
Or do you think they'll work with him and actually try to put things together that he can support? Will there be bipartisanship, or is it really too late for that? The 08 election.
I think there are a few things they will do. Certainly they want to get through a minimum wage increase, and the fact that 5 different ballot initiatives on minimum wage passed on Tuesday. That got kind of swamped by the rest of the news. But they passed by an average of 31 points. I mean, Americans understand that it's been 9 years since we raised the federal minimum wage. We need to do something about that.
That seems like the sort of thing Bush would get in on, don't you think? I mean, he likes to look benevolent, doesn't he?
But look, they got burned. They got burned at the beginning of his administration trying to be responsible, particularly when they had the Senate, and working with him on things. And I don't think they're going to make that mistake in these next 2 years. I do think if they are smart, what they will do is return to immigration reform and try to get through a bill. Yeah, that's the big thing that seems like
it will happen. And Bush wants to do that anyway.
He wants to do it. But
isn't there danger that the Democrats are helping Bush look good, helping him accomplish something that he actually wants to accomplish?
No, because, see, immigration is lose-lose for the Republican Party. It just tears apart different factions of the party, and it's going to be a huge problem.
When Bush is out, he's not running for re-election. Bush can take responsibility for that on himself and see that as a big accomplishment. He's doing it because the Democrats are doing it, and all the other Republicans are untouched by it, and Bush leaves office and has nowhere else to go. So,
but it's not that they're untouched by it.
Only Bush. Bush is winning because it's his legacy. Why isn't that good?
No, and it's a very big issue because whatever goes through is going to be something that splits the Republican presidential candidates in 2008. I agree that Bush doesn't maybe care one whit about that, but it is going to influence who has a better platform to run on in the primaries. And if he has any sort of opinion about what the successor to him is going to look like, it's going to be influenced by whatever immigration legislation goes through, because that is tearing apart the party. And it's going to be it's already a huge issue. If you go to Iowa,
right, I'm just
and talk
picturing
to
the people
voters
who want to be on the other side from him can just stay there, and then Bush wanders over and allies with the Democrats on that one point, which he wants to do anyway. So Bush gets something he wants. The Republicans can distance themselves from that. Democrats want it too. And then in 08, Republicans and Democrats will be defined by the immigration issue, but the legislation will already have been passed.
It's not the case that all of the Republican primary candidates for 2008 are on the other side of Bush from the immigration issue. They're just not. It's going to split them up, and it's going to become the issue that dominates their discussions in the primaries, which is not going to be good for a lot of them. I mean, there are other things that they want to be talking about.
But you don't think if the legislation is through that we'll move on to other issues? You think that issue will just stay alive even after the legislation goes through?
Particularly if it's something that a large portion of the Republican base does not agree with. That will become a galvanizing issue in the primaries, and it'll be something that they have to deal with whether they want to or not.
Yeah, I'm picturing that one just becoming water under the bridge once we'll fight it all out over the legislation, and then once it's done, people will move on to something else. They won't just spend the '08 campaign grumbling over something that already happened.
No.
Don't you think people move on from one issue to another?
Absolutely not, particularly when they smell blood there. I mean, the really conservative folks who are going to be running are going to pick that up and say, I would have done something completely different. I'll be a different type of leader, and put it to their opponents and say, what's your excuse for supporting this?
But will they have been hurt by the fact that the legislation went through? I mean, they'll be able to score whatever political points they want off of it, but then there's no danger that they'll actually do anything because the legislation will already be done. They'll just be able to use it for political, rhetoric, but there's no danger of anything actually happening since it'll be in the past. It'll just be in the rhetoric category, won't it? Everyone will get their rhetoric out of this, won't they?
Maybe.
But the legislation will be passed because Bush will ally with the Democrats.
But it's not as if immigration ceases to be an issue for most Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to continue to be something that's very hot button. I mean, it seems like yesterday, when I was on the Hill the first time around, we were dealing with immigration reform. It comes up every 10 years, and in between those 10 years, it continues to really rub people raw. And I just don't see any way that this is a non-issue in 2008. But anyway, we've strayed somewhat, I think.
Well, we're kind of talking about all our middle three issues at the same time. So let's see. I'm looking at my list and thinking, did we segue or did we just mush them all together? Do you think that's a female
We
thing?
might have mushed them together.
The three issues as being one thing, and instead of sequentially going from one to the other, we saw them as all merged. I think that might be a gender thing. We need to bring Bob in here to opine on that. What do you think?
Well, I guess my original thought in terms of looking at what this election means for 2008 is, can we really use this as a metric to judge what is happening with different demographic groups, and if that tells us anything about how they'll behave in 2008? And my overall thought has been, no, that this was just an extraordinary political situation. Democrats did gain among some key demographic groups that they have been needing support from.
Yeah, I saw you have an article in the New Republic, right?
Right, yeah, and how they
that.
did up their support from white evangelicals and Catholics, but they also gained support among almost every demographic subgroup. So I'm not sure that's going to hold
I'm trying to picture how that's going to happen. I mean, I think a lot of pressure was built up, and a lot of people that were generally dissatisfied with things started to have this ideation that the Democrats were the place to go. But with the Democrats actually in power, they're going to get disappointed with the Democrats again. And isn't it... there was just a lot of pressure built up, and this election kind of relieved the pressure and gave people a chance to sort of relax and feel a little happy for a while. But then what's going to happen?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that, they gained among all these groups, but I don't think that was, the Democrats did something to attract more female voters or more NASCAR dads or more white evangelicals. I think in general there was a movement towards Democrats and away from Republicans, and that was definitely more of a statement about how people felt about Bush and the congressional Republicans in general. But what's interesting, and what I looked at in that piece, were the races where Democrats actually really tried to go out and court white evangelicals and more moderate to conservative Catholics. And they did see a movement actually far above the national average in terms of the jump in support from those two groups.
And what were the issues that really moved Catholics and evangelicals toward Democrats? Was it the war mainly?
Well, I think definitely Catholics were moved by the war. But it's interesting, and I still have not quite found a good way to communicate this to some of my colleagues who continue to come after me with the question of, well, what issues is it that will really move these folks? And I think what Republicans figured out a little while ago is it's not always issues. It's sometimes a matter of character. It's sometimes really just a matter of the approach to an issue. To the extent that there is an issue that moves some of these voters, it actually was a different approach to abortion. There were about half a dozen states this year where the state Democratic Party and the candidates started to talk much more in terms of reducing abortion rates through prevention measures, through support for pregnant women, and didn't just talk about protecting choice, although that continues to be an important principle for them. And it's interesting, when they sat down with a group of moderate to conservative Catholics, abortion, of course, comes up, but for the first time, that wasn't also the end of the discussion. They could agree, even if sometimes there were disagreements about birth control and whether or not they supported that. Most Americans, something like 95% of Americans, think that it's okay to use birth control. So that becomes kind of an easier way to talk about getting together on ways to reduce abortions, instead of just talking about criminalization and restrictions, which really seem to split Americans pretty well. But,
so you think that was a big part of what was going on in the election? I just don't remember seeing that at all, but I know you studied it there, so there were...
Oh, it definitely didn't get picked up in different places. And this also, it was not a matter of people running commercials on it, which is really why it's going to be interesting to see whether it holds over for 2008, and whether more state parties and candidates choose to do this, because what really moved, I think, particularly in Michigan, where Jennifer Granholm got 47% of the evangelical vote, that's just astounding. I mean, Kerry got something like 23% in that state in 2004, and that's been about average for any Democrat who isn't Bill Clinton.
Yeah. So is the idea that these are people who would naturally vote Democratic, but they're so upset about abortion that they just feel they have to abandon the Democrats, and if the Democrats would just be a little more sensitive to how they feel, they'd naturally come back. They'd just go right back.
That's some of it. I mean, I had really doubted that that was going to be the case, that it was that simple, until I started going out and talking to pro-life voters. And for many of them, they are not looking for the Democratic Party to get behind overturning Roe or really getting behind harsh restrictions. They are looking for an acknowledgement that there's a moral dimension to abortion.
So they're that easily won. Just show them that you care. Make the gestures of caring about abortion, but go right ahead and keep supporting it, and then they'll come back and it'll all be over. It was that easy. Why have we gone 30 years if the problem's so easily solved?
That's not what I was saying, though. It's not that they think it's okay to just say the right thing about abortion and then go ahead and don't do anything about it. What's significant now is they're hearing from politicians who say, I'm personally opposed to abortion, and here's what I will do. I will make it part of my agenda to reduce the abortion rate, but I'm not going to do it by imposing restrictions and by criminalizing people. I'm not going to criminalize doctors. I'm not going to criminalize women.
I still think Democrats have known that that's what they needed to say and do for years, and that idea has been around for a long time. I mean, you're really just saying, well, they need to say the right things and show a little sensitivity, plus put a little money and have some programs in addition to that.
But look, if you ask
something behind it, that seems like very little, really.
You ask the average voter on the street if they think that Democrats are pro-abortion, which you and I know they are not. They would say yes. That is the image that they get from the party. You listen to the Democratic National Convention, and you will hear speaker after speaker just rail about choice and protecting choice, which, again, is an important principle. But people get that. They understand that's what Democrats stand for. What they haven't ever heard is people saying, you know what, we need to reduce that rate, though. 1.3 million abortions.
I feel like the Democrats have been
saying
saying that for 10 years at least.
But it's not going to. I mean, you and I are listening to a different conversation. They need
there's some really vocal people who talk about abortion rights in such a way that it really offends people who are deeply morally opposed to abortion. And those people, it's a little bit similar to the gay rights issues. There's people who would come to a moderate resolution, but the really strong proponents of the cause like to show up on the stage and put things in their really feisty terms, and it's very offensive to the people who would otherwise meet in the middle.
Right. Well, and here's what I was going to say made the biggest difference, I think, this year, is that folks in Michigan and Ohio and Kansas and a couple other states just had meetings with evangelicals and Catholics who, in some cases, have never heard from a Democrat before. Nobody had ever picked up the phone and said, you know what, we want to talk. And it was just astounding that you get in the same room, and they may not agree with you at the end of it. They may not even vote Democratic. But they come out of it and understand that you're coming to your positions from a moral point of view. They may not agree with it. It may not be their point of view. But they don't see you as someone who's just totally cold and clinical. That you are bringing a moral perspective to it.
Yeah.
And that is so important in terms of changing the overall image of the party.
I agree that's what they need to do. I just can't believe they haven't been doing it this time and hadn't had that figured out. I mean, were they so dominated by strong abortion rights groups that they just didn't want to offend those people? Or those people are a big source of money for the party, right?
It's a huge source of money. I don't think this is a matter at all of Democrats thinking they'll lose votes if they moderate their abortion stance. I think they are deadly afraid of losing money.
Losing the money, that's what it's about, right?
Yeah.
So they knew that they needed to do this. Do you agree with this? Am I losing you?
No, I'm here.
Oh, I was getting a little interfered. So they knew what they needed to do, and this strategy that you're describing is quite obvious, and everyone could figure that out. But they never wanted to do it because the people who want to hear right to choose rhetoric and ideology had so much of the control over the money that they were sort of beholden to those people, and then they weren't willing to do what they needed to do. But suddenly they've overcome that for some reason.
Well, I don't think it's totally that simple. I think there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party who believed and who still believe that these pro-life voters who might cross over just simply don't exist. Mm-hmm. They don't think there's anybody who's going to vote for you unless you really change your position on abortion. But, again, that's obviously not true. You look at Ohio this year, it was all pro-choice candidates running on the Democratic slate, and yet Ted Strickland appears to have gotten half of the evangelical vote in Ohio and got almost half, I think, 58% of the Catholic vote. And that was not because he changed his position on abortion. It was not because these voters suddenly decided abortion didn't matter to them. It was the way he talked about it that convinced them that it wasn't a matter of black and white, that he was kind of on the same ground that they were.
Yeah. I mean, my point is just, it seems to me that was such an obvious thing that was needed to do for so long, that the only extraordinary thing is the willingness to change those terms and speak in different terms, not like, we suddenly figured out a different way to speak. I mean, that was always obvious, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's been known for a long time.
It took a couple of Democrats.
So what's interesting is what phenomenon made them give up on the way they've been talking before, what made them change. And also I think maybe some of it is that these people that you talk about as not being recoverable, they'll never come over, those people were softened up just by feeling weary about the war.
Yeah, that was some of it. But I also think, I just wrote a profile of the guy who just became governor of Colorado, Bill Ritter, who's a pro-life Catholic Democrat. And it took a few candidates like him saying, even if I'm risking losing money, you know what, I'm not going to go out and change and say that suddenly I'm pro-choice. This is just who I am, and if you don't give me money, I'm going to try to win without you.
Well, isn't there a problem generally with the Democrats that their sources of money are limited and not enough like their the people who would vote for them? And in the Republican Party, there's more of a match between the people who are giving the money and what those people believe.
I think that may be some of it, but I also think it's been tough for a lot of pro-choice donors. And here I'm not talking about the PACs, because I understand if you are a pro-choice PAC, of course you're going to back pro-choice candidates. That's your issue. But for people who are just individuals who are pro-choice, I think it's been hard for them to see a difference between a Republican who's pro-life and a Democrat who's pro-life. And the Democrat is not going to make it their life's mission to go out and overturn Roe v. Wade and to, institute all these restrictions on abortion.
Right.
There are different ways to be pro-life, and I think they're starting to see that it can be more palatable and that it is, in fact, much more preferable to have, a pro-life Democratic leader in the Senate who's majority leader. That once you get Democrats in power, all of a sudden, you just completely protected choice so much more than it was for the past 12 years.
Right. Well, should we talk about the media coverage of the election?
Sure.
I just wanted to say that one of the reasons why I feel frazzled and unprepared to talk about what yesterday looked like and so on was that CNN had this devious plot there are a lot of conspiracy theories going around. I'll air some of them, but CNN had a devious plot possibly a devious plot, to round up all the bloggers and put us in a detention camp, which was a glamorous, hip, cool, sophisticated coffee shop bar type place in Washington, D.C. called Tryst. So they brought us all in from all over the country. They flew us in. They rounded us up. We had to get there by 5, and they kept us there until 1 or something, under the lights with looming HDTV screens everywhere, 20 images of Wolf Blitzer striding around, it was just a crazy, chaotic scene, and the idea was that they were going to show us constantly on the Pipeline, which is a web service that they're trying to get people to subscribe to, and then they'd also show some shots of us on their regular cable news channel interspersed with those images.
I saw you on CNN.
Wolf Blitzer striding in front of blue swirly graphics about various numbers and statistics. So it was all very crazy sensory overload. It was kind of cool for the bloggers to get a chance to see each other in the flesh and meet each other. But at the same time, we really wanted to be able to, I mean, if I was home, I'd be watching TV and reading the internet and trying to write about things, trying to see what was going on.
Right.
But in that situation, I was just like dazzled by the lights and the chaos, and it was impossible to think straight or even see things. And it was kind of a goofy situation because the idea was that we were going to watch it and then give the sort of blogger's view of things writing in that room, but you couldn't see.
But were you
very
able to
well.
even blog?
You couldn't see anywhere near as well as somebody who was actually sitting home watching it, and you couldn't write very well. And actually, the internet connection was a little iffy and bad, so you couldn't even connect as well. So the sort of conspiracy theory is they deliberately tried to advance the cause of mainstream media by tricking all the bloggers into going somewhere, like those police stings where they say these are some kind of, I don't know, you meet the football stars and then they all go to a room and then they arrest you, something like that. So it was like they got us to all go to the coffee shop, and then we set up there like we were going to be the hip, cool, on-screen, whatever. And this was a big triumph for bloggers. But in fact, they were rounding us up and putting us under conditions where we couldn't actually compete with them. And meanwhile, they were sort of using us for imagery. But then they were able to dominate the media that actually got out to people. So that was a little,
how many bloggers
my
were
take
there?
on that. Did you go on?
How many bloggers were there?
There were about 30, so they tried to get all the kind of big political bloggers. Somehow I got on that list, even though I don't, I'm sort of not the normal political blogger because I'm not tied to either party, and I'm not. I actually kind of hate both parties, and I voted for half Democrats, half Republicans when I voted. I don't really like any of them very much, and I'm always sort of looking for sort of humorous or eccentric or different kinds of takes on things, but I'm not, I'm not a party hack of any kind. Some people think I am, but I'm actually not. But anyway, they tried to get all the big political bloggers out there in a room. But then they put us under conditions where it was sort of like, have a party, meet each other, and that'd be really interesting, but also show your stuff. This is your chance to really blog the hell out of the night. But you couldn't really see the information in the normal way, and the conditions for writing were just not normal, not good. So it's like they conquered us.
Well, not to minimize the importance of all of you who were there, but I think they would have had to lock up a couple thousand bloggers in order to completely switch attention to the mainstream media. I have to admit that, we turned down a number of election parties, mostly because the last thing I want to be doing is standing in some big hall or around other people watching TV. I want to be able to flip back and forth between the channels.
Well, one of the things they said was
most of the evening on my laptop, particularly with Virginia. We just plugged into the Virginia returns page and kept refreshing because that actually had much more up-to-date information than any of the networks.
Well, we were sort of enticed by the fact that we would each have our own individual little TV and that we could control it. But it's sort of like, how can you have like 50 TVs in a room that people are switching? It wasn't that easy to switch it around, and it wasn't that easy to hear it. And if you turned yours up, then everybody else would turn theirs up, and everybody would also talk loud.
Yeah,
and it became
like
an insanely. I'm still mentally fried. I mean, I don't know if I'm doing a good blogging heads or not, but I'm still sort of mentally fried from it. I haven't been able to just get back into my normal swing of things. I feel like I've been sort of off balance for several days and I really feel like I didn't get to see the election. But I'm kind of glad I went and got to meet some people and went to it as in sort of a party mode. But it was very confusing while I was there because I was thinking, well, I kind of like this and I kind of want to meet people, but I was also like, hey, I need to show that I can blog the election. But actually, I'm not able to do this. I ended up just taking a lot of pictures and going into a kind of...
I saw your pictures. They were quite good. But I felt the exact same way about the conventions in 2004. I would have done a much better job if I was home watching on TV. Because for one thing, we had no connections. You kept having to run back to the hotel to blog.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But,
I don't see, right, it's easier. There are a lot of things that you can cover just from your armchair at home on TV and using the internet. And, normally I'm just out here in Madison, Wisconsin, covering things, and I seem like I'm completely in the loop, even though I'm in this remote outpost in the Midwest. And then, you go to Washington and you can't see a thing.
He just stays in Orange County and blogs from his house, and he covers it almost better than anyone.
Because you can see things, a certain kind of calm, a certain kind of remove keeps you from being dazzled by all the, all the distractions.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you survived, but I'm sorry. Maybe you should TiVo it next year or next time, and then you can go back and get the experience.
But actually, what's on TV during election night is really boring.
Blather.
There's not much to see there. I was comparing it to Oscar night and how it's probably better to actually go to an Oscar party on Oscar nights because you sort of have this feeling that you want to be there live, watching things unfold, watching things happen. But they actually dribble out so slowly that it's a big bore, and by the end of the night you're just like exhausted of all the boredom. And the next day you could just read it in 10 seconds and know everything. You were sitting there for hours. But if you're at a party, you can sort of have a feeling of being there, but not be totally bored. And so maybe it's better to be...
But there's nothing to compare with the excitement of just the returns coming out one after the other, hour after hour.
I'm
such a political geek that I love that stuff.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, we watched MSNBC almost all election night.
Yeah, other people were saying
and
MSNBC.
I'm starting to get converted. I mean, between Chris Matthews and his kind of crazy shtick, and Keith Olbermann, who's just become this huge fighting liberal. I love listening to him. And then Joe Scarborough's kind of gone off the edge. He's so disappointed and frustrated.
I can't listen to Olbermann at all. He's just, I don't get that at all.
Oh.
Well, you're in love with Olbermann, right?
Yeah, it's just, I guess.
That.
Well, I just find it refreshing that you can find so many conservative commentators on cable TV. Mm-hmm. And until recently, it was the occasional Phil Donahue, who I don't care for, or Alan Holmes. But Keith Olbermann is unabashedly just tough, and maybe it's just, finding something unusual that... I'm enjoying it now. It may get old, but
I guess it's a certain kind of commentator that's just there for people who are already on that side, and if you don't really want to hear the strong stuff, you can't bear to listen to him at all, but the people who agree with him are stimulated and excited by that. Sort of like watching...
but it's more than that. It's that the feeling that it is hard to get anything other than the conservative line, even from a place like CNN, because they appear often to be talking as if they're afraid they're going to get a deluge of conservative phone calls if they say anything that's favorable to liberals. So it's just nice to see one place on television where maybe somebody's pushing back at that. And
I think it's fine that they're...
channels.
I don't think the channels should all be alike, and I think that all the newspapers have some bit of a slant, and if you're not exactly in the place where they are, you're going to think you perceive bias, no matter how professional they are. And I think it's fine that there just be different places to go with and blogs are the same way, different places to go to kind of fine-tune exactly what feels right to you. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who like to watch news on Fox News because, they just get, they just feel edgy watching the way it's presented on CNN, and so they just like fine-tuning it's not that they want to deceive themselves, I don't think, some of them maybe, but it's just that they feel so uncomfortable and edgy by the slight slant that they perceive that they need to, dial away from it and get it right into the place where they feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. But some people think, well, that's just wrong. That's terrible to choose your news channel like that. But that is what people do, don't you think?
As long as you're listening to a number of different sources, I don't have a problem with it. I do worry when people only get their news from people that they agree with. And then it's possible for them to dismiss anything else is either made up or just coming from a slanted point of view, when, of course, everybody has a point of view. And if you're listening to a number of different outlets, then you can judge for yourself what's balanced and come up with kind of...
Yeah, but what feels balanced is going to have to do with what you already think. So you could say, I want a balanced presentation, but you're going to only feel that it's balanced if you go to the place that matches where you already are.
It's kind of annoying that we've gotten to a point where people think that there are different versions of facts. I mean, there should be... a agreed upon set of facts. There used to be. And then there's your interpretation of them and what you
What's
take
that
away
quote
from
that you always hear? You're not entitled. You're entitled to your own interpretation, but you're not entitled to your own facts. What is that quote? That political quote one always hears.
I don't know, but that's a good quote.
What is that quote?
I don't know.
Oh,
if
okay. Well,
if
it's
I had a
like
laptop here,
I'll have to look
I'd be
that
able
up
to
and
check
put it
it
in the notes.
All
I should
right.
have that at my fingertips. But yes, it's true.
So-
There should be something called facts, but you have to put it in language, and that's going to have a certain feeling to it. Language conveys a kind of an emotion about the facts. I mean, you could have facts about what's going on in Iraq, and if you support the war, you can hear the way that, like on NPR, if you support the war and you listen to the way the facts about the war are presented on NPR, they could be completely factual, but the tone, the way they're structured and presented, conveys an opinion that you can feel, and that's an accurate feeling. It's not that, I don't want the facts, I want different facts because I'm not happy with the facts. It's, I can tell by the way they're presenting the facts that they're doing something with them, and it's making me edgy. I don't like that feeling. It makes me mistrust them, right? That's why you need the other channel to go to.
Well, I'm going to have to run here in a couple of minutes.
Oh,
Have we covered
okay.
all of
So
our
we've hit the
all of
1
our
hour mark,
topics?
I think.
I think so.
Okay, so any closing thoughts you want to raise?
Oh, I'm kind of like you. My brain is just fried from staying up too late on Tuesday and then writing too much. But it's been an exciting week.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get unfried and be able to focus and look at things. But I guess by then it'll all be old news, and the idea
We'll be on to the next
let's
story.
talk about '08 and who's running for president, and this will all be just a crazy memory.
Yeah.
So should we sign off?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Thanks
it's
for
been
talking.
a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.